Chapter 8. Learning from the Dead. 7 of 13 remain. What is this? Renetta stared at the bowl in her lap like its contents were going to come to life and crawl out. Raisins, cranberries, and granola. It's swimming in milk. Aren't you supposed to like that sort of thing? Renetta's look soured, the milk in the room adding a trace of assent to the expression. Because I'm a cat? Naira shrugged. Because earlier you were screaming like an infant. Milk sloshed from the bowl as Renetta stiffened. It splashed onto her pants, and she would have spilled more if Naira hadn't grabbed the bowl again. The Sneppard stared at her pants as if the milk was some caustic substance that was going to eat into her legs. Over the past 20 minutes, she'd unstrapped Renetta from the chair, opting instead to tape her arms together at the wrist and her legs together at the knees and ankles. This had enabled her to help Renetta to the bathroom down here, which was about the only finished part of the basement. It had also given Renetta ample opportunity to fight back, and Naira's shirt and skin bore numerous new rips from the indignant woman's claws. Naira's size had ultimately given her an advantage, not something she was used to having with Sneppards, but Renetta was on the smaller side. Naira shook her head, then held out the bowl. With conjoined wrists, Renetta cradled the offered bowl. Naira ran upstairs to grab a towel, then returned to help clean up the mess. She held the bowl for Renetta again, allowing the woman to dry off her own legs. Just drop it on the floor. I'll leave it with Gertrude before I go. Renetta did so, the towel landing on the concrete with a splash of white droplets and a wet slap. She stared up at Naira with a firm gaze. I knew fractal junkies were weird, but you take the cake, love. I'm honored, Miss 13. Now, do they spoon-feed you at home, or can I trust you to feed yourself? Renetta actually growled at that. I can feed myself. Good, Naira said, handing back the bowl. She crossed her arms as she leaned back against the dryer. Before you made a mess, you were talking about what's going to happen to your companies? Balancing the bowl in her lap, Renetta took a spoonful of cereal. Her face went through a myriad of expressions as she chewed, before settling on something between disgust and disappointment. She swallowed before answering. Well, you're sure that the police are going to think I'm dead? I faked a blood trail over to one of the main chlorine pumping stations. I left your suit jacket behind, ripped in spots and covered in my blood. If I had dumped your body in a vat of chlorine, it wouldn't leave much to be identifiable. They'll probably think that bits of you got pumped into the ponds. Renetta paused, spoon dripping milk as it hung halfway to her mouth. You are a disturbing individual, love. You didn't actually stick some unfortunate soul in the pump, did you? I had to give them something to find, didn't I? The spoon shook in Renetta's grasp. That was a joke, Naira said with a wry smile. Dragging you around was already enough work, and I wasn't about to kill someone just to cover my own trail. Didn't seem to stop you back in the factory. Naira frowned. Pardon? Renetta stared at the colorful, floating chunks in her spoon for several moments. Her lip twitched, as did her nose, but she ate it anyway. I heard the gunshots. Marston told me during the evacuation that you'd already killed several of my guards. Shaking her head, Naira replied, Wasn't me. He said that it was a Nolf, not one of mine, shooting my men. Wasn't me, Naira repeated. I don't use guns. Renetta narrowed her eyes. Now I know you're lying. You shot me last night. Naira blinked, head tilting to the side in her confusion. Wait, with what? Whatever that metal gun-shaped thing you had yesterday, that you used to shoot me with lightning or electricity or whatever that was. My catalyst. It's not a gun. I mean, it can be used as a gun, but it's a tool for alchemy. Keeps the energy build-up away from hands and fingers. Safe science. And you're not on drugs right now? Clean as a whistle. Minus the murders, Renetta said, looking smug as she forced down another spoonful. Look, I don't care if you believe me, Miss 13. It's Madame Dolahan. Okay, sure, Madame. Renetta tapped her spoon on the edge of the bowl. Not Madame. It's Madame. Madame. Renetta smirked, her self-satisfaction plain on her face. She took another spoonful, and her face soured at the teaspoon of reality. Naira sighed, claws clicking as her fingers drummed the dryer. I didn't kill anyone last night. At least, I tried very hard not to. You're right. I don't believe you. The snappered woman brought the bowl up to her nose, whiskers twitching as she gave it a sniff. Making a face like she was preparing to drink castor oil, she finished off the milk before bringing the empty bowl back to her lap. Naira wasn't sure what to say, but she didn't have to decide. Renetta glanced towards the window before giving her own sigh and continuing. But I can play ball. On the improbable chance that it wasn't you shooting people, love. Then who was? From what I saw up above, it looked like one of the workers. Impossible. They're not trained to use guns. Guns aren't exactly a complicated piece of machinery that requires special education to use. Even someone new to guns can hit something pretty easily if it's close enough. Renetta flicked at the spoon with the back of a thumb, sending it rattling around the circumference of the bowl. So, you're suggesting that one of my workers started shooting up the place? On a night when a homicidal native just happened to be coming to kill me? Naira's drumming stopped, her fingers instead balling into a fist. She forced her breath out through her nose before she responded. That, or someone else broke in when I did. Her mind flashed back to the night before, to a stairwell with an open door at the top. Actually, I came in through the roof, and I don't think I was the only one. So it probably wasn't one of your workers. The roof? How the fanina did you get on the roof, love? Naira shrugged. I flew. Renetta's eyes narrowed again, then checked Naira's back as if looking for wings. With a laugh, Naira brought her arms forward, miming a climbing motion. Actually, I'm more of a spider. Do you think the other native climbed up the same way? Naira sighed. Probably not the exact same way, but possibly something similar. And we don't know anything about the mental state or awareness of the other Nolf. Renetta raised an eyebrow, reaching up with bound wrists to scratch her own cheek. They came into a factory and shot several guards. If you're telling the truth, and that wasn't you, jury's still out on that, by the way, love, then why? If they were after me, they did a far worse job than you. If they wanted to shoot things up, perhaps they themselves wanted to be shot. Either way, that sounds like textbook definition of going native. Ignoring her growing annoyance, Naira shifted the topic. Obviously, someone wanted you dead. Have you received any recent threats? Any disgruntled employees you can think of? People with reason to kill you? Leaning back further in the chair, Renetta gave a snort, her face taking on a fresh smirk. I'm the Minister of Labor, love. My office is flooded with mail from people across Cyphus. Everyone feels underpaid and overworked. So, rather than seek alternative employment or actually put in the effort to make something of themselves, they complain and ask me to increase the minimum wage. It's like they don't understand that artificially raising wages with nothing to back it just increases the cost of living for everyone in the bulb. If you ask me, the real problem is that they're not teaching actual economics and business mindsets in schools. People want handouts, not fulfillment. Sorry, I realize a lot of this probably goes over your head. Naira fixed her hostage with a flat stare, feeling her own eyes narrow this time. Do you practice being so condescending? Or does it just come naturally with having more money than the seed mother? I am a teacher, I know what it's like to be underpaid, and I also understand basic economics. Renetta blinked. You're a teacher? Naira tensed. Something about the way she'd said that was distinctly predatory. Naira had to remind herself that this woman was a hostage, not a guest, and would likely turn her over to the police at the first opportunity. We're not here to talk about me. We're here to figure out who wants you dead, why they want you dead, if you should be dead, and how to find the people behind all this. A dangerous smile took over Reneda's face. I didn't know they let people like you become teachers. Can't be many like you. Correct, because people like you do everything you can to keep people like me from finding success. Renetta raised an eyebrow. Love, you do realize that I employ nearly a third of all Norse that reside in the bulb. I run a program to recover, rehabilitate, and train rescues so they can find employment and avoid winding up on the street. I can guarantee you that no one has done more to help people like you find success than me. Naira's gut told her to sock this pretentious woman right in her smug face. But that was Salatra trying to resurface. The situation didn't call for the destructive touch of lightning. It called for the calm, rational approach of an alchemist. We're getting off topic, Naira said, surprised at the edge of a growl in her own voice. Though you are helping me better understand at least a few reasons why someone might want to kill you. Upstairs, the phone rang. They'd have to continue this later. Naira pushed off the dryer, taking a moment to appreciate the warm sunlight from the window. I guess that's my cue. Work is calling. You're going to go to work? After everything you did last night? Yes. Do you have something more productive for me to be doing? Absolutely, Renata said, eyes resolute. Let me go, and turn yourself over to the police. Yeah, that's not happening. Then let me go. Naira shook her head. All of Cyphus needs to think you're dead. Besides, you'd turn me in the moment you left. I promise not to. She held up her hands, palms pressed together piously. I don't believe you. You don't have to believe me, but you should trust me. Trust you? Good point, Naira said, holding up a finger. Wait right here. Renetta's self-satisfied smirk escorted Naira up the stairs. Naira returned several minutes later with a pair of handcuffs she'd taken off a guard the night before, a length of reinforced chain, and a fresh roll of duct tape. Renetta's smirk wilted. Surely you're joking, love. Moira Dolahan leaned against the car window, watching the buildings pass. The sidewalks were full of life, marching almost in time to the beats pumping in her ears. This was her people-watching cassette. It was a Midnight Thunder album, and the progressive synth was perfect for capturing the energy of Cyphus. Passing pedestrians walked by, and it was most gratifying to spot the ones whose footfalls matched the kick of the snare drums. Two businessmen chatted with a conversation she could hear in the subtle melody of the piano. Miss Moira. Tapping her thumb on the plastic cassette player clipped to her waist, Moira pretended not to hear Sergei. The song was building anyway. She'd acknowledge him after the bridge and the drop. She watched the passing sea of white and gray, all dressed in their matching drab suits of gray and black. There was no color to make that life outside have soul. Then she saw it, a splash of brown making a wave through the crowd as the saxophone kicked in. It seemed so out of place against the steady synth and drums, yet somehow it complemented it so well when you gave it a chance to show itself off. Unfortunately, because it wasn't what people were trained to listen for, and because it wasn't what people were expecting their music to sound like, they rejected it. She watched the seas part for the splash of brown, chin passing above small triangular ears that weren't anywhere close enough to risk touching each other. The saxophone faded out as the splash turned a corner and got absorbed by the wall of white. She wished it would stay longer. As the chorus kicked in again, Moira slid her headphones from her ears, bringing them to rest on her neck. She paused the cassette with a satisfying click. Her jacket crinkled as she leaned back against the synthetic leather seat. Miss Moira? Sergei asked again. Moira sighed, turning her attention from the window to her side to look through the privacy window at her driver. It was rolled down, of course. Moira rarely had a reason to use it. Her mother used it for meetings whenever she took calls through the phone in her car. But Moira didn't want Sergei to feel like he was driving alone, even if she took her sweet time in responding to him. Yeah? If I may be so bold, you seem rather distracted this morning. Is everything all right? Moira let out a sigh, fogging up the glass as she turned back to the window beside her. Yeah, Sergey, everything's just peaches and rainbows. Sergey quietly turned the corner in a practiced glide Moira could barely feel. Peaches can go bad, and rainbows are only brightest after heavy rains. Moira snorted. What do you want me to say, Sergey? That life is great, grand, and wonderful? Glancing towards the front, she caught him watching her through his rearview mirror. He smiled in that annoyingly perfect way she couldn't stay mad at. I think that is a lovely outlook to have. If it were true, maybe. So what is keeping it from being true, Miss Moira? Her hands started playing with the plastic dangly bits of her charm bracelet. Mom didn't wear hers anymore. Reminded her too much of Dad. Moira sighed, muttering low enough that part of her hoped Sergey wouldn't hear. Mom didn't come to breakfast today, either. She's still avoiding me. From what I heard yesterday, Miss Dolahan was giving an important tour last night. She likely had an early morning follow-up she had to attend. Yeah, she'd rather spend time with her adopted daughter, Work, than her real one. I don't think that's true, Miss Moira. Sergey didn't get it. Of course he didn't get it. What did he know about kits or parents? He wanted to support both sides, and she was grateful that someone among the adults actually talked to her, but that didn't mean he understood. She hasn't talked to me since I tagged the school library. Probably because vandalism is a crime, Miss Moira, even when done for the right reasons. So her version of juvie is to ignore me for a week and a half? And that's going to somehow teach me to be better? She's working hard to provide for you, Miss Moira, and, yeah, that's all she knows how to do. Sliding her headphones up over her ears, she clicked play and let the synth drown out Sergey's voice. An odd, repetitive midtone crept into the song, adding an unfamiliar line to a song she'd heard dozens of times. It went away as Sergey answered the car phone. Her gaze wandered out the window, bouncing off the heads of the people they passed. The buildings were getting shorter, and they were almost to her school. The buildings stopped moving as Sergey pulled the car over, 4 blocks too soon. Moira glanced forward to see if there'd been an accident, but the street was clear. She glanced at Sergey, but couldn't hear what he was saying over her music. Slowly, he brought the phone down and turned back to her. Pausing her music again, she slid her headphones back. It was his look of worry that made her ask, Sergey, what's wrong? Miss Moira, it's about your mother. You should take the phone. Leo's jitters faded into the background, soothed to sleep by the sweet song of Necrol. It was nice to be able to focus again. This was a weird case with inconsistent behaviors. There was always an underlying logic, and Leo always unearthed it with time. He'd been put on this killer's trail after the second member of the 13 had been killed. Melissa had initially been assigned to the case, but the chief had given him seniority when it became clear there was further danger. Leo still didn't know what the chief was thinking. Melissa was perfectly capable, and this had only driven the wedge deeper. She blamed him for accepting an assignment he didn't want, as if she thought he was still willing to lie to her. He took another puff of Necrol, relishing the weight in his lungs and the pleasant warmth in his brain. Taking the stick from his mouth, he stared at it. Maybe Melissa had it right. Maybe people didn't change. Seed mother. 3 years later, and Melissa still had a way of hijacking his thoughts. Rolling the stick around in his fingers, Leo let out a sigh. As he put it back in his mouth, a voice spoke up beside him. You do know how they make those, right? Leo jumped, nearly swallowing the Necrol stick. Naira, the alchemy teacher, stood almost within arm's reach beside him. Was she that quiet, or was he that distracted? She gave her signature polite smile, though her eyes held the disapproval of a mother. She only had a few inches of height on him, but in that moment it was hard to ignore. Looking away, he took one final puff before dropping the stick and stomping it out. Visualizing his stress leaving his body, Leo let out a long breath. It kind of worked, but seeing Naira in his periphery wasn't helping. I'm guessing I don't want to know. It's blood, primarily. blood, and ash. Hospitals take blood donations, right? But eventually those go bad. When those expire, the necro companies purchase them and use them to make their products. You're saying I'm smoking blood? No, I'm saying it takes blood to make necrum. You're inhaling the results of the reaction, which are certainly toxic. The more expired the blood, and the more of it they concentrate, the stronger the reaction. The stronger the reaction, the more noticeable the effect, but the more dangerous and toxic it becomes. Leo glanced at her, feeling his morning scowl returning. Thanks for that lovely image. Look, I didn't choose to be addicted. No, but you're choosing to feed it. She met him with an even gaze. For just a moment, he felt like he was back in academy, facing scrutiny for his attendance record. I feed it less than I used to. It's not your business. Your business is to provide insight and assistance with this case. He could tell from her eyes that she didn't want to drop it, but she inclined her head in a slight bow. You are right. My apologies, detective. Somehow, that just made him feel worse. Necrol was supposed to make him more tolerable and normal around others, not feed the parts of him that offended people. If anything, he should probably be the one to apologize, but the moment was already past, and it would be awkward now. Better to just move on. Turning away, he gestured with his head. Come on, I've got one more interview, and then I can show you around the crime scene myself. Naira nodded again, readjusting her shoulder bag with a heavily bandaged hand. Leo didn't miss her grimace as she used the hand. As they walked, she was favoring one leg a bit, too. Kinda surprised you showed up, Miss Naira. The school said you'd had an accident? She looked away in embarrassment. Or, perhaps because it was him asking the question. Leo did seem to have that effect on people. Even when he tried to be polite, or friendly, or care about others, he was still awkward and found ways to screw it up. Two, actually. I had a reaction explode in my hand because the reactants made contact prematurely. Shredded my palm and left a bit of a hole. Still hurts, I'm afraid. Something exploded in your hand? What? She smiled at that, glancing at him. And accepted the risk of alchemy. If I hadn't been wearing gloves, it would have been worse. Okay, sure. But the way you're saying it makes it sound normal. Like you and the other professors are all handling explosives and injuring yourselves regularly. Like it's just a thing you're expecting to happen on any given Sunday. Shouldn't you still be at the hospital or home, recovering? Naira shook her head. The hospital is far too expensive, and the injuries are within my ability to treat. They will heal with time. Now I'm afraid to ask about the second accident, if the first was an explosion. Oh, I tripped down the stairs trying to answer the phone this morning. Banged up my legs and shoulders, and everything hurts now. Anna, awful couple of days for you. Indeed. The conversation died after that, and they spent the next few minutes walking in silence. He didn't have siblings, and excluding Tolson, the few friends he made in school had all drifted away with time. So small talk really wasn't Leo's specialty. Arriving at a huddle of police cars in the factory's main yard, Leo was waved over by another officer. He and Naira walked over to find this officer talking quietly with a young snipperd in the same guard uniform as most of the people Leo had interviewed today. Beside him, Naira spoke. I have lost time this morning by my tardiness. I do not wish to take up more of your time than necessary. So, if it would be helpful, I can go begin gathering evidence while you finish this interview. Leo sighed. If this is about the necrol, I'm not mad. The teacher shook her head, tearing her gaze from the security guard to look at Leo. Just trying to be efficient and not waste your time. Leo took in a breath, then released it. It was already several hours after midday. Lunch at Benji's was going to have to be dinner at Benji's at this point. In fact, they'd been waiting for Naira so long that Tolson had left to actually grab some lunch. He still hadn't gotten back yet. So as tempting as it was to let her go do her thing so they could be done faster, it wasn't going to make much difference. He summed it all up by saying, It's fine. I've got nothing but time today. She didn't look convinced, but she gave a modest nod. Naira continued to follow him, though her gaze was anywhere but the interview. He'd try to make it fast, for her sake. Leo and the other officer exchanged pleasantries, then the officer stepped aside. Leo cleared his throat, and the kit in security garb looked up from where he'd been playing with his hands. Then he stood up, arm raising into an awkward salute. Sir! Put your hand down, Kit. We're not the army. Sorry, sir. The fur on the back of Leo's neck rubbed against his collar. What's your name, Kit? Standing up straight, the boy brought his hands to his sides. Bryce Luxon. I'm Detective Leo Parsons, and this is Forensic Specialist Miss Naira. He turned to gesture towards her, but her gaze was in a different direction. Clearing his throat seemed to get her attention, and she turned to the boy with a polite smile. The kid's eyes went wide, like he'd never seen a Nolf before. You're a teacher, she interrupted, and my name is Naira. The emphasis on her own name was heavy. She was probably used to people resorting to slang. Okay, Bryce, I'm told you're one of the guards that actually ran into our killer last night. Want to tell me what happened? I do, sir. I really do, but I think it's better for my health if I don't. Bryce, that's not how this works. People died last night, and we need to catch who did it. It's okay. You can talk to me. This is my job. I'm here to help you. Leo frowned. Has someone threatened you? The boy's silence was answer enough, though he did eventually speak. Kind of. He was still staring at Naira with that same shocked expression. For her part, she took it like a champ, seeming unbothered by his stare. In fact, she took a step forward, causing him to back up against the police cruiser parked behind him. It's okay, Bryce. No one is going to hurt you. We want to catch whoever was killing people last night, because we really don't want any more innocent people to die. It would be tragic, wouldn't you agree? So help us all by telling Detective Parsons what you saw last night. Bryce did not seem the least bit comforted by Naira's words, but Leo couldn't fault her for trying. And to her credit, a few seconds later, the kid opened up. His gaze was still fixed on Naira, and the few times he looked at Leo, he seemed oddly stressed. I was assigned to another security guard, Henry Pritchard, last night. I'm still in training, so he was supposed to take me on his route and show me the ropes. When the shooting started on the main floor, we took cover and tried to circle the shooter. That's when someone reported the men who'd been shot in the western stairwell, so Henry thought the shooter had gone upstairs. Some guards were already going up the western stairs, so he wanted to take the eastern stairs, to cut off the shooter, like a pincer thing. He brought his fingers together to visual aid. Leo was impressed. He hadn't caught the kid take a breath during that entire spiel, and he was still going. We ran into her on the 3rd floor. She came bursting through the door, collided with Mr. Pritchard. Sorry, Henry. He told me to call him Henry. She collided with Henry, and they both went over the rails, only she didn't fall. She just climbed back onto the stairs like nothing happened. Leo pulled out his notepad, testing his pen in the corner of a fresh page. Can you describe her for me? Bryce just pointed at Naira. He'd taken another step back. Like that, sir. They already knew they were looking for a female Nolf, so that wasn't exactly helpful information. There were literally thousands of people that would fit a description that generic. Naira shook her head. There are many people who look like me in Cyphus, Bryce. You'll have to be more descriptive. Was she carrying a gun? What were her eyes like? Did she give a name? Anything you can remember that might help. It seemed she wasn't any more patient than Leo. Naira? The boy seemed confused, looking ready to leap from his skin and leave nothing but a pile of discarded fur. Shaking her head, Naira adopted a tone that took Leo back to his classroom days. No, Bryce, that's my name. What's her name? Salatra, Bryce said slowly, like a student taking a total guess and hoping the teacher would give indication of whether it was right or not. Reaching out, she patted him on the cheek, though it probably had the opposite effect she intended, since he flinched away. Was she carrying a gun? Did she threaten you? What happened to this Henry that she accidentally knocked down the stairwell? For not wanting to come on this interview, Naira had certainly taken charge of it. Maybe she still didn't trust Leo to be impartial, since they were hunting a Nolf. Or maybe this was just his luck with the women he was supposed to work with. Leo finished writing down the name Salatra, then struggled to keep up as the dam that was Bryce's lips burst again. I mean, it was dark, and it happened so fast, but I think she did have a gun, and... Did she? Naira interjected. Did she? Bryce repeated, voice growing higher as if he was asking her. This kid was a terrible witness, but it seemed like Naira's mere presence was stressing him out. Sometimes that could be helpful, but Leo was beginning to have his doubts about its effectiveness with this one. Naira folded her arms, raising an eyebrow at the kid. He blubbered some more as he seemed to search his brain. Though the way his eyes were scanning Naira's face, it was almost like he hoped to find the right answers there. Maybe not, I don't know. She pointed at me a couple times and told me that she'd attacked some people but didn't want to kill me, I think. That's good, Bryce. Tell us more about that. Leo sighed, then put a hand on Naira's shoulder. Miss Naira, may I have a word? Excuse us for a moment, he said to Bryce, and the kid's face melted into relief. Pulling Naira out of the kid's earshot took a good 10 paces, and Leo leaned in to whisper anyway. Look, I appreciate that you want to help, but you're coming on rather strong. The kid already wants to talk, but frankly, you're scaring him. I'm sorry, I know that's something that's probably not in your control. It might be better to go with your original plan and go collect evidence while I finish the interview. She looked hurt at this, or maybe just annoyed. She normally looked so calm and stoic, Leo wasn't sure how to interpret the emotion she currently wore. But we are making progress. Yes, we are making some progress. I just think we could learn more if... So I'm unhelpful to you. In this context, maybe, Leo thought, but he didn't dare say it aloud. No, it's just... Good. Then shall we return to the interview? Feeling the onset of a headache, Leo rubbed at his temple. This is what I'm trained for. You've got him off his guard, which could end up being helpful, but now we need to calm him down a bit so that he keeps talking. You know, make him feel safe. Naira did her little head tilt. You think he feels threatened by me? Glancing over his shoulder, Leo saw that the witness hadn't stopped watching them. He was talking to another officer, but stopped when he saw them both looking at him. You know, I think he might be a bit threatened by you, yeah. I doubt it's anything personal, though, so try not to let it bother you. It is not the most common response to people like me, but it is one I'm used to. I will not interfere with your work. Then she gave a slight bow. Deference was the last thing Leo wanted right now. However, if she stopped unduly stressing the witness, then maybe he could learn something useful. Okay, yeah, sorry. She shrugged. It is not your fault that he fears me. Somehow, that didn't make Leo feel better. Well, let's get back to it, shall we? Chapter 9. Family Dynamics. 8 years ago. Tazael tossed his rubber ball at the floor. It ricocheted off the floor, then the wall, then sailed across the room, back towards where Tazael sat against his bed. He caught the ball, tossing it again while he continued to stare into the corner of the attic room he shared with his brother. His brother, Ren, was laying on his stomach on the bed they shared. He stared out the attic window, watching the occasional person walk past. The rubber ball was something Tazael and Ren were meant to share. They were luxury toys if you bought them from the store, something the rich Sneppard kids played with. Those kids didn't have a mother smart enough to make one. Unfortunately, the school hadn't given her material for a second one. Right now, Tazael didn't want to play with the ball. He wanted to be looking through the magazine of Sneppard girls his classmate Derek had loaned him, but he wasn't about to do that with his younger brother in the room. It would kill the vibes, and Rin might rat him out to their parents. So instead, he continued bouncing the ball against the wall, hoping his brother would get bored and leave. Maybe something through the window would inspire him to go play outside. Music from a guitar spilled through the open bedroom door. Dad was getting more practice in. Without meaning to, Tazael found himself trying to match the beat of the bounces with the rhythm of his father's song. Ba-bum, catch. Ba-bum, catch. Mr. Frank is getting arrested, Rin said from the bed. Big surprise. Everyone said he sold drugs. Tazael tossed the ball again, trying to will boredom into his brother's brain. He's fighting back. There's a couple officers trying to subdue him. Yeah, that's what snobs do. Don't need a play-by-play, Ren. Taz, I think he's got a series of gunshots rang out, leaving a bitter silence in their wake. Dad's guitar had stopped, so he was probably running to the window right about now. Tazel sighed and caught the ball. Rin didn't need to be watching this. The girls would still be waiting for him later. He forced himself to speak with an energy he didn't feel. Let's go see if dinner's ready. Grabbing Rin's hand, he dragged his younger brother off the bed. There was little resistance. Rin still dealing with the shock of what he'd just seen through the window. Of course, Tazel already knew dinner wasn't ready, otherwise they'd both have smelled it. That wasn't his concern right now. His brother had a tendency to fixate on stuff he really shouldn't. By the time they reached the attic ladder, Ren was moving on his own. Just because you've got 2 years on me doesn't mean you need to baby me, Taz. I can, I should, and I will. You're stupid. You're stupid. Now why don't you go see if Mom needs help, and I'll check on Dad. The guitar still hadn't resumed. That meant Dad was fixating just as much as Ren. Life kept moving, no matter how long someone stopped to watch the show. Ren continued on down the stairs, while Tazel went to his dad's music room. The door was ajar, so he pushed it open and peeked in. Light from the window illuminated a room with a wall dedicated to stringed instruments. Each one was either a hand-me-down, pawn-shop purchase, or junkyard recovery. Regardless of their true value, their dad treated each one with care, restoring them quite well for someone with as few tools as their family had. Sunlight danced across the strings of an acoustic guitar that lay forgotten beside the single chair in the center of the room. Tazel's father, Elaine, stood at the window, fingers tense against the windowsill. Dad? His father blinked, hearing his son for the first time. Oh, hey, Taz. Tazel could see the moment his dad considered glossing over the truth. Instead, his father asked, Did Ren see it? Tazel nodded. Fanina's cracks. Okay, I'll mention it over dinner. Tazel didn't like the idea, but he couldn't put his finger on why. Maybe you could not talk about that stuff tonight? A grimace worked across Elaine's face. This is reality, son. We can't just ignore it. But maybe just one night without it? Ren already gets a lot of that at school. It's all he and his friends talk about. They should be talking about bikes, or cars, or girls. Instead, they run the school paper and print depressing life stories and current events. Elaine smiled at that. Ren wants to be a journalist. It would be a fitting profession for him. Yeah, well, he should know better than most that he doesn't have the face for it. His father's expression soured. A bit of an edge crept into his voice. Tazel, we don't talk that way in this house. Your mother and I are living proof that you can do what you love if you work hard enough. Yeah, or if you're born with white fur and a cat face. Tazel! He hadn't meant to stir up his father, though it wasn't like getting sent back to his room would be a bad thing. He dismissed the thought quickly, raising his hands to his shoulders in surrender. The gesture worked a visible change in his father, who softened. I'm sorry, Tazel. I shouldn't yell. Tazel shrugged, ignoring the apology. Dinner will probably come sooner if I go help Mom. His dad wanted to say more, but couldn't seem to find the words, so Tazel turned and left. They'd been born into an awful life. They all knew it. The problem came when they continued to dwell on it, rather than just finding fun in life in spite of it. His eyes drifted to the attic ladder. Then he smelled the cooking oil. Sending a mental apology to the girls for continuing to make them wait, he wandered down towards the kitchen. It must have been the weapon, his mother was saying as he entered. The police only shoot you if you pull out a weapon. She added meat to a skillet already half filled with sizzling ingredients. As she worked, she glanced over her shoulder to check on Ren, who was quietly slicing an onion. He shook his head. It didn't look like a gun. Naira smiled sadly. If it was across the street, it's a long way to see from the attic. We just have to trust that the officers know what was really going on better than we do. Snickering, Tazel took a seat on a swivel stool. Dad says you used to fight officers because they didn't know what they were doing. His mother shot him a look that laid him so low his chin came to rest on the counter. That was back in the day where guns were the exception rather than the rule. Nowadays, if an officer tells you to do something, you comply and sort it out later. What if they're wrong? Rin asked. Better to have that come out in court because you obeyed when you didn't have to, than to be dead because you were trying to prove something. Ren finished cutting his onion. Then he tapped the cutting board with the knife. But that's wrong. I know, sweetheart, but they don't care. Regardless of them, the truth always comes out in the end. So do what's right, don't get in trouble, and trust that the truth will prove you right. The truth always comes out in the end. Tazael bounced the idea around in his mind, like he was playing with the rubber ball again. That bouncing uncovered a question. Is that what happened to you, Mom? Naira paused where she had been stirring the contents of the skillet. Her gaze remained on the food, as if it held her answers. The truth always comes out in the end, she repeated. Then she turned to him with a knowing smile. Now come help your brother chop the mushrooms. With a heavy eye roll, Tazael swiveled off of the stool and stepped around the counter to help his brother. Slicing into a mushroom, Ren whispered something. Tazael strained to hear it, but didn't quite catch it. He leaned in, and his brother repeated himself, louder. Not sure if you've seen it yet, but there's some big onions on page 23. Tazael felt his temperature drop, and he immediately spun to see if his mother had heard. She had. Page 23? Of what? Ren's tongue lolled out as he adopted the most obnoxious, dross-looking grin. Tazael definitely had to lock him out of their room tonight, and not just for the girls. Present day. Leo revisited his notes while Naira collected evidence from the main floor of the Dolahan Electrum factory. He'd been right. Having Naira give the kit some space had opened him right up. He'd still glanced at her every so often, even flinching a few times. But on the whole, Bryce had helped to both paint a fuller picture and muddy the waters even more. The poor Kit had lived through the unfortunate experience of running into the killer twice. Once back at Lortrin, and once here at the factory. Hearing his testimony, both times he'd run into the same person, someone he called Silatra. The first time, she'd used him to gain access to Lortrin's private meeting chambers, where she'd blasted Lortrin out a window. This time, their paths crossing seemed much more coincidental. Leo still hadn't ruled out the possibility of the Kit as an accomplice. It was one possible explanation for why being around another Nulv like Naira made him so nervous. He had mentioned several times during the interview that he wasn't sure how much he could share, as if someone had threatened him to keep him quiet. But what of the woman Bryce described? She seemed driven, relentless, but not heartless. For all her ability to blow through a pack of guards like a passing storm, with one exception, the one thing she didn't leave much of in her wake was corpses. And yet, there were 4 dead this time, including the target. Between that and the much shorter passage of time between this hit and the last one, something wasn't adding up. Lost in his thoughts, he managed to finish a neck roll before another officer came jogging over. Detective, we've got someone wanting to speak to you. Another witness? No, sir. It's the victim's daughter. Oh, Fanina. Leo ran a hand through his hair. Dealing with next of kin with the 13 had repeatedly proven to be an exercise in frustration. Bunch of rich, spoiled brats who just wanted to know how soon they could have their lawyers work to consolidate their relatives' money. Dolahan's daughter was still a Kit, so that would just exacerbate the self-entitled behavior. Take me to her, officer. Several minutes later, he had visual confirmation of his fears. Dolahan's daughter stood near a small cluster of officers that looked like they were trying to block her on every side. Her arms were folded, hidden inside the arms of a ridiculous jacket of neon blue and orange. She'd pulled both arms of her pink shirt over to the same side, opting to stick her head through an oversized armhole, rather than the actual neck like a normal person. She wore her very own cassette player prominently on the waist of a set of bright orange baggy pants, and a pair of headphones hung around her neck. Both the player and headset were worth about half as much as Leo's car, a testament to how new the technology was. Yes, everything about this girl screamed spoiled, rich little brat. Despite being over a head shorter than any of the officers in the circle, she stared up at them with open anger. Then she opened her mouth and cemented herself in Leo's mind. Someone better answer me right now. Where the brack is my mother? She spit the words so forcefully, her voice cracked halfway through. He didn't want to deal with this, but as head detective of the case, he was obligated to. So he cleared his throat and stepped forward. My name is Detective Leo Parsons. If you would come with me, I'd be happy to answer any questions I can. She gave one last round of glares to the officers around her, and they parted to let her pass. Her jacket was a poofy thing that seemed to double her width and rustled with every step. Leo hadn't kept up with fashion trends from his own generation, but it seemed they'd only continued to decline. Marching up to him, she fixed him with wet, red eyes. I've got nothing but the runaround since I got here, and I'm sick and tired of it. Detective, where's my mother? We're not sure, he admitted. You're not sure? She took a step forward, leaning into his space as she hissed the question. What the brack does that mean? It means, he said, trying to dredge up any remnants of necro calm, that we haven't found a body. We know there was an attack last night. We've got some security dead, others wounded, and your mother is missing. The girl's hands came to rest on her hips, nearly every finger twitching as she scanned the scene. Missing, she repeated. My mother missing. Then she shook her head, whiskers quivering as her nose and mouth roiled. No, she said it calmly, though her voice was a little strained. No, 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 just no. I don't believe you, Detective. I'm not stupid. I wasn't born yesterday. I've heard what's been going on in the news. Someone's been killing the 13, and if they came after my mother last night, then she's already dead. None of you care to catch this guy, so you just drag your heels and make appearances, and then have the nerve to lie to me? This was a painful reminder that teenagers were Leo's least favorite demographic to deal with. I'm not lying, Miss Dolahan. We're not hiding the body from you. We just don't know where it is. The girl looked like she'd just taken a slap to the face. Several fresh tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. I was right. She is dead. She's gone. We don't know that for sure, Leo started. Stop! The girl shouted. Her claws had poked holes in her jacket, revealing bits of white stuffing. Just stop. See, Mother, all my mother ever did was coddle me. I'm not a little girl, so stop treating me like one. Her hands shook by her side, but she met Leo's gaze with barely contained fury. Fanina, this is the worst. Leo's shoulders fell in a sigh. Yes, she's probably gone. When we find proof, we'll be in contact with your lawyers. You shouldn't have any problems getting to your inheritance. How was it that Leo had such a gift for always finding just the wrong thing to say, despite all his best intentions? The girl's eyes practically bulged as her fury exploded. You think I give a dross about my bracking inheritance? Then she slowed down, her voice rippling with anger as she spoke like she was addressing a kid. I want my mother. So do your bracking job, find my mother, and get whatever bastard anima spawn robbed me of the only family I had left. She scanned around. Where's your supervisor? I want to speak to your boss. For once, Leo didn't mind foisting someone off onto the chief. He's gone back to the station for the day. Then I guess that's where I'm going next. She shook her head, scowling like Leo was the worst snippet in all of Cyphus. Thanks for nothing, Detective. With that, she stormed away. Leo stood there, dazed. At the same time, he was relieved it was over. A familiar siren song wafted from his pocket, despite his recent fix. As if in direct response to his craving, Naira appeared behind him, and he jumped when she spoke. Who was that? Once his elevated heart rate had a moment to settle, he replied, Victim's daughter, Moira Dolahan. Ah, how is she? Loud, presumptive, angry. Naira continued to watch her leave. Well, she did just lose her mother. We don't know that for sure. Leo said the words as if Naira was the one who needed the hope. Then he sighed. Yeah, probably. I'd be thrilled if Dullahan got away and was just hiding somewhere, or checked herself into a hospital, but I've been doing this too long to hold my breath. What must it be like to lose a parent? Naira asked quietly. Glancing at Naira, Leo was surprised to catch a tear in her eye. Then the question hit home, and his own eyes started to water. The Necral's song was becoming a scream, so he laid his hand over the pack to smother it. From what I've seen, it's pretty rough. There must have been something to his voice, because she turned to regard him with questioning eyes. He looked away. Blessedly, she kept her questions to herself. Uncomfortable memories threatening to surface, Leo changed the topic. I think I've spent more than enough time here today. I need to decompress. It's a little early, but Tolson and I will probably hit up Benji's for dinner. Would you like to come along? Talk about the case? She hesitated, seeming to consider it before the polite smile returned to her face. I should get back to the university lab. I have much evidence to process, and the sooner I get started, the sooner I will have your report. After that, I could really use some rest. So thank you for your generous offer, but I will pass today. Leo couldn't decide if he was more disappointed or relieved. He tried to keep the indecision from his voice. Well, can I at least drop you off? I do not wish to inconvenience you. The bus is sufficient for me. Leo shrugged. The sooner I have your lab results, the more convenient it is for me. I really don't mind. Naira hesitated for a moment more, then gave a delicate nod. Very well. Thank you for your time. As they began walking to his car, Leo snickered, though not derisively. Why do you always say that? Tilting her head, she regarded him as she strode beside him. Thank you for your time? Yeah. Now it was her turn to shrug. It was something I learned from the one who taught me alchemy. Other people's time is valuable and should be acknowledged and respected. Does it encourage others to acknowledge and respect you back? Leo had meant it as an innocent follow-up, but as it left his lips, he realized just how sarcastic it sounded. Thankfully, she didn't seem to take it poorly. No, she admitted, not usually. If anything, it just encourages the ones who walk over me that they were always in the right. But that does not mean I should stop doing the right thing just because someone else wrongs me. Leo thought aloud. What? I kind of like that. I should hope so, Naira said in a tone reminiscent of the days when his mother had strength. You are a police officer. If we cannot trust you to do the right thing when everyone else is in the wrong, who can we trust? He smiled, embarrassed at her words. Then he glanced at her eyes, and his bashful mood evaporated. There was a hardness to her eyes, a challenge written behind irises as blue as the ponds. A familiar guilt crept in at the corners of his mind, though he wasn't sure why. The longer they held eye contact, the less sure he was of what she wanted. Eventually, his own discomfort won out, and he looked away only to bump into another Nolf. This one was dressed in factory garb, but green and white, and kept their head down as they muttered an apology. Leo returned the apology, but the man kept walking, lifting his hand dismissively with an open two-finger wave. Leo shook his head and reflected on Naira's words as they reached his car. Who can we trust? Climbing in the driver's side, he leaned over to open the passenger door. He had to give it a good shove to keep gravity from closing it again. Settling back into his seat, he saw Naira standing in front of the car, frozen in place. Her fingers tightened on the strap of her bag, and she started glancing in all directions. Cranking his window down, Leo leaned out. Everything okay? Naira continued to stare back towards the bustle, still happening outside the factory. Without looking at him, she gave a slow nod. Sorry, I just thought I smelled something. Leo took a sniff, and there was something there he didn't recognize, but it was faint. Almost like a bag of firearm pellets that had expired. He couldn't tell if it was from inside or outside the car. Maybe Naira was just extra sensitive. A few moments later, she finished walking around the front and got into the car. Closing the door, she buckled herself in. Good to go? Leo asked. Not forgetting anything? She nodded absently, her nose twitching. Sulfur? She asked, though her question wasn't directed at him. Why would it be? He didn't know the first thing about alchemy. He shrugged before putting his key in the ignition. Naira frowned. Then her eyes went wide. Her hand shot up. Wait! Not processing her warning in time, Leo turned the key on instinct, and his car exploded. The end of part 1. Chapter 10. Crashing. People gave them weird looks as Moira and Sergei entered the District 3 police precinct. Admittedly, they were probably an odd pair. Sergei, a Nolfin man, towering over her in his ironed, monotone suit, and her, a scrawny, snappered kit in a bright, loose jacket and baggy pants. As much as she hated it, Moira did her best to channel her mother through her posture and her walk. She needed answers, and she needed results, both things her mother usually obtained much more easily than Moira could. Stepping up to the glass, Moira rang the little bell on the counter. An officer on the other side of the glass peered up from where she had been engrossed in a book. Her gaze was dismissive as she took in what she could see of Moira, but curiosity, and maybe a hint of fear, kicked in when she saw Sergei. Moira waved her hand, dinging the bell again to recapture the officer's attention. Something I can help you with, young miss. You could change your posture, your expression, your bearing, and none of it mattered, because people would still only judge you by first appearances. And people wondered why Cyphus had such a crime problem. The older Moira got, the more she understood the appeal of crime. If people weren't going to listen to you, why not just do what you needed to anyway? It's not like the hypocrites in suits were really any better than others. They just chased acknowledgement, same as everyone else. Moira cleared her throat, fixing the woman with her best commanding stare. I'm here to speak with the police chief. The officer swiveled in her chair, glancing at a clock on the wall. It's already 16:28. Chief clocks out at 16:30 every day. Want me to schedule an appointment for you for tomorrow? She leaned forward, looking at a day planner on her desk. Oops. Just kidding. He's booked tomorrow. She flipped the page. The third Sunday, and next storm day. Moira shook her head. No, I need to see him today. As I already explained, young miss, his hours do not allow for any more visitors today. Reluctantly, Moira pulled out her trump card. My name is Moira Dolahan, daughter of the Minister of the Department of Labor, Renetta Dolahan, member of the 13. It was a practiced spiel, one that her mother had spent several years driving into her. It was also a spiel that took mere seconds to drive a wedge to any relationship opportunity she had at school, so she always avoided the topic. People inevitably found out anyway, usually through roll call. The first week of class was the only not lonely week of any given semester. Today was different. She didn't care to be friends with this officer. Right now she was on a mission, and it seemed to get through. The officer hesitated, white fang pressed into black lip, but she eventually nodded and buzzed them in. Second floor, just follow the signs. If you run into him in the halls, you can't miss the chief. She flushed with embarrassment and quickly added, but don't tell him I said that. Thrusting hands back into her pockets, Moira shouldered the door before Sergei could get it. Normally, she let him do the whole honored butler thing he so enjoyed. Right now, she was in a hurry. She took the stairs 2 at a time, something Sergei was able to do with a stride that looked identical to his normal walk. Being tall must be nice. They passed other officers, who gave them similar puzzled looks, whispering as they walked by. She wondered if anyone recognized her from the days her mother had spent publicly campaigning. It seemed some did. Following the signs brought them to the chief's office. A wall of windows displayed a large office with a desk that would have made her mother jealous. A shelf on the wall displayed a number of awards and trophies. A candidacy poster for Robert Paddock hung behind a leather chair that seemed built to seat 2. Maybe this had been his office once. A heavy glass door opened as they approached, and the largest snapper Moira had ever seen stepped through. Despite his cat-like features, the man was tall and built like a bear. It was rare to encounter someone on Sergei's scale, and unsettling to realize he probably outweighed her driver. Moira must have faltered, because she felt Sergei's comforting hand on her shoulder. He would never know how thankful she was to have him here with her. Chief Bradburn locked the door to his office. Moira cleared her throat, and the man looked their way. Then he checked his watch with a scowl. "Sir," the word grated on Moira's tongue. "I'm Moira Dolahan, daughter of—" The chief sighed, replying in a low, gravelly voice. "I know who you are, Kit. What do you need?" Moira's hands formed fists in her pockets, but she tried to keep her voice steady and her face even. People only ever had two responses. Either they wrote her off as a rich kid and didn't take her seriously, or they groveled and catered to her because they feared her mother. Moira had 2 more years before Cyphus was required to acknowledge her as a full-grown adult. Considering her growth spurt had already come and gone, she highly doubted a couple years would change anyone's perceptions of her. The chief didn't seem like he was going to be the type to grovel. Great. That should make her happy, but it was a lose-lose situation. "I need to know where my mother is." The chief crossed his arms with a sigh, staring down at her over his stupid, bulging biceps. "She's dead, Kit. Sorry." "That's it?" "Yes. She was killed down by the ponds late last night, along with several guards." "Then I want to see the body." Moira drove her claws into the pads of her palms. The distraction was better than letting this man see her cry. The chief hesitated. "There isn't one." It was the same runaround the detective had given her, and Moira was getting pretty fed up. "Then explain to me just how the brack you know so conclusively that she's dead if you can't even find a body." "Because they stuffed her body down the filtration system." Moira felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Her lips went numb, and her head started to spin. Part of her was angry at herself for flinching when this man yelled back at her, but it was hard to think. The officers on scene had all neglected to mention this important and life-shattering detail. Probably because they had wanted to protect the kit. Well, they could all go rot in Fanina. Since hearing the news over the phone, she'd held out hope. She'd known it was dumb, but she couldn't help herself. Mom was resourceful, smart, well-protected. She couldn't be gone. Moira felt the house of cards crumbling beneath her, scattered by her own drive for keeping adults honest. She didn't even realize she was losing her balance until Sergei caught her shoulder. Count on him to be the only stable thing in her life. The police chief pinched the bridge of his nose. "Sorry, Kit. If they flushed the body, it would have been run through the pumps and the vats of stuff they use to keep the ponds clean. It's going to be weeks before we find anything, and that's if anything survives." Pressure in her ears, her own heartbeat thundering. She felt sick. Sergei's voice was muddled. "Thank you, sir. I think that is all that we wished to know." They both loomed over her, and she couldn't bring herself to look up. She needed to. She needed to be strong, but her chin was so heavy, weighed down by the tears dripping to the floor. "I'll make sure your family gets a copy of the police report when this is all over." "Thank you," Sergei said again, hand squeezing Moira's shoulder as a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone. "Are we ready to go, Miss Moira?" He didn't stoop when he asked the question. Thank the seed mother, he knew better. She wanted to reach up and squeeze his hand, or cry into his stomach, but she would rather have died herself than continue to degrade her own image before someone like this police chief. She respected authority only if it respected her autonomy. No authority in Cyphus had fit that requirement yet. Autonomy wasn't a legally protected right for Kits or Nolfs. It was hard to form words, but Moira made it happen. "You're gonna get whoever did this, right?" Lifting her head, it felt like trying to lift a car with just her nose. But once she met the police chief's gaze, she refused to drop it. He returned her gaze with an expression she couldn't read. Not that she was in a state to be judging, or even care about other people's emotional responses right now. Tellingly, he waited too long to respond. "We're going to do our job." Bracker. Moira held it together, passing the random officers in the hall. When she passed the woman watching the front, she kept her head high, her pace casual. Only in the safety of the car did she break down completely. Sergei started rolling up the privacy window, but she stopped him. Pulling her headphones on, her thumb hovered over the play button. She couldn't listen to music. Not now. Her fingers worked into her hair, claws scraping her scalp as she brought her knees up to her chest. Leaning back against her seat, she glanced up at the front. She caught Sergei's face in his mirror, and he wasn't doing too hot either. So she didn't complain about how long it took him to start the car. Where would they even go? Life had been forced to a stop. It was all she could manage just to stare out her own window before the car started to move and reality crushed her entirely. It was miserable to feel so small and so alone. Naira came to consciousness with a series of violent coughs. Her temple throbbed where it rested against the window. Cracks spiderwebbed from the point of impact all the way to the edges of the window. She felt like she'd stuck her entire body in an oven. Tears came to her eyes, brought to the surface by the black cloud of ash hovering in the car. Sulfur, ammonia, and smoke assaulted her nose in equal measure. Gravity held her against her door, and it took a moment to realize the whole car was listing. Propping herself up by an elbow, she waved a hand through the smoke. It didn't do much, except stir the orange and ashen haze. Searching blindly, her hand found the seatbelt buckle. It was stuck. The unnatural angle with which her weight was pulling on the belt wouldn't let it unfasten. She shifted in her seat, her shoulder driving into cracked glass and nearly forcing it from the window. Her other hand found the buckle, and she yanked. The belt sliced its way into the gap between finger and thumb, and she gasped at the fresh jolt of pain. Her hand felt wet through its bandages, and she knew it wasn't sweat from proximity to the fire. Her feet protested at the heat as she pushed off the floorboards. She vocalized their protest as she gripped the belt more fervently. Yanking it in every direction she could manage, the buckle finally came free. No longer supported, her body slid the last few inches to rest fully in the corner formed by her seat and the door. Naira coughed again, eyes bleary. Orange crackled on the other side of the windshield. She smelled far too much melting plastic and burning oil. And a new scent, necrom. Feeling for the center console, the car lurched again as her hand brushed a dial. With a firm grip and a quick twist, she deactivated the car's remaining functional repulsor. Her teeth dug into her tongue, leaving her tasting blood as the car slammed to rest on the street. Gripping the door handle, she pulled hard and threw her shoulder into the door. It didn't budge. Spinning on her back, Naira pointed her feet at the window. Then she kicked. The pre-stressed glass shattered outwards. Several large chunks sliced into her back and legs as she grabbed the roof of the car and pulled herself through. The strap on her bag snagged on a piece of glass and nearly tore through. Naira stumbled as her feet hit the street. The entire front half of the car was enveloped in smoke, and she couldn't see the hood through the flames. Her hand plunged into her bag as she staggered around the front of the car. She'd packed light today. Most of what she'd brought was just for appearances. She didn't even have her catalyst on her. Her fingers brushed against a cold metal cylinder, one of 2 prism canisters she carried just in case. Bringing it up to her mouth, she bit past the tip, something her teeth were not happy about. The prism washed over her, chasing away the dulling effect of the smoke and necrom on her oxygen-deprived respiratory system. Propping the bag against her knee, she dug around for any prepared crystals. Terrum, Fyrum, Electrum, none of those would help. There was a pair of Aurum crystals, but she doubted she could starve a fire this large with those. And she found it. A single, light blue crystal near the bottom of the bag. Aquam. She shattered it with a hand covered in red bandages. A rush of cold embraced her palm, stabbing her hand with thousands of angry needles from the rapid temperature change. Reaching out to the energy, she visualized it condensing. Tiny droplets of water grouped together like schoolchildren gathering for a field trip. A small cloud formed over the hood of the car, rain dive-bombing valiantly into the flames. It wasn't enough to put out the fire, but it bought her time. Naira limped around to the driver's door. Now that the smoke could escape through the window she'd used, she could actually see Leo. Thankfully, his door opened when she tried the handle. Smoke billowed out, refreshing the scents of sulfur and ammonia. Worse, the cloud was tinged with a thick purple haze that seemed to want to coat Naira's lungs. Necrom. Leo's face was hidden behind an airbag. It was deflating, just slowly, and it was definitely the source of the ammonia smell. She had to get him out of this death trap. There was no response from him as she pulled him towards her. Leo hit the edge of motion his seatbelt would allow, leaving his upper body leaning out of the car at an unsustainable angle. Taking a deep breath and closing her eyes, Naira forced her way between him and the airbag. Gripping the belt across his chest, she followed it until she found the buckle. This one came free almost immediately. Someone came running up as Naira came back into open air. A female officer, wearing the same kind of badge as Leo. She grabbed Leo under the arm, supporting him as Naira helped pull him free. All three of them stumbled backwards, dropping Leo onto the street. This other detective got under both his arms and began dragging him further from the smoking mess that was his car. Naira wrapped her own arms under his knees. Her shoulder protested as she lifted him, leaving his tail to drag along the metal ground. Only once they'd put several car links between them and the fire did they set him down. Several more officers approached, but stopped short as the detective turned towards them. Her voice carried surprisingly well, but perhaps that was just Prism enhancing Naira's hearing. "Someone call in a medic!" The officers nodded and took off running. Leo was a mess. Blood ran from his nose and ears, and his eyes were unresponsive. Part of his shoes were burned through, exposing singed flesh. At least he'd been wearing shoes. More importantly, he wasn't breathing. Naira pressed gently on his stomach, then leaned in. She caught a whiff of Necrom. "What happened?" the new detective demanded. Naira glanced up, reading the smaller woman's badge. McKinley. Naira shook her head, muttering a quick, "I don't know." McKinley turned, shouting for a medic once more. Naira drove her fingers into Leo's neck, feeling for a pulse. She couldn't find one. Crystals rattled together as she dug in her bag. Kurum wouldn't help if his heart had already stopped. Seed Mother, she hated Necrom. If she'd stayed in the enclosed car any longer herself. Casting the thought aside, she fished out both Electrum crystals. "Help me get his shirt open." The detective turned back toward her, eyes narrowing as they scrutinized Naira. "Your eyes. You're a medic." Naira shook her head. "Not fully trained, but I need to make skin contact, and I don't think my hand is in much condition to fiddle with the little buttons on his uniform." McKinley hesitated only a moment before nodding and setting to work. Grabbing both sides of the shirt, she pulled, tearing multiple buttons free. Anything that still held together, she cut free with her claws. Yeah, that worked. Naira gripped at her wedding ring, sending fire through her injured hand. With a gasp, she let go. This was one of those rare cases where Prism was not helping. She held up her left hand towards the detective. "Please, remove my ring." McKinley glanced up, then obeyed. Breaking both crystals against her palm, Naira held one in each hand, feeling the fur stand on end as the electricity produced by the reactions sought an outlet. Her fingers began to contract, gripping the crystals tighter as some of the electricity escaped through her own body. She pressed the crystals into his chest, trying to place one on either side of his heart. Naira focused on the reactions, latching onto what electricity remained and sending it towards Leo's heart. She could feel it respond, the magic wrapping around Leo's heart. Starting with as low of a voltage as she could, she ramped up the electrical output, hoping to find a sweet spot that started his heart. She found it right as the energy fully dissipated. She drove her fingers into his throat once more. After a moment, she felt a flutter, then a second flutter. Then they slowed before disappearing entirely. She growled, despite herself. This had to be because she'd let Renetta live. They hadn't bought her ruse, so now they'd tried to kill her. It was the only explanation why someone would blow up the car. She wasn't going to let Detective Parsons be killed on her account. Crystals clinked together as she dug through her bag again. Fyrum, Fyrum, Aurum, Terrum, Aurum, Curum. No more Electrum. Nina. The fur on her fingers stood up once more. She still tasted blood in her mouth. Cilatra had what she needed. Cilatra wanted to help. Naira had been so close. She just needed one last push. She knew where to find it. A growl of frustration ripped past her lips, causing McKinley to jump. This hadn't gone so well last time she'd been this desperate, and it was going to hurt. Before she could let that thought paralyze her, Naira bit down into her own tongue, hard. Warm blood exploded into her mouth. Prism made her acutely aware just how large the new hole in her tongue was. Her cry of pain was choked out by the blood spilling down her throat. Naira's jaw twitched, her fingers driving into her leg in a desperate attempt to provide distraction for the open fire in her mouth. She half spit, half drooled into her hands. Red disappeared amidst the charcoal fur, slicking her hands as she rubbed them together. Fresh blood was a potent reactant, but open-air casting like this required a lot. She had to be quick before the magic left the blood. Pressing her bloody palms against his chest, she reached out with her prism. Yes, blood, by its nature, wanted to engage a necrom reaction, but she didn't let it. She was looking for something else, an oddity exclusive to her own blood. Hiding beneath the desire for chaos was something far quieter, a spark. She snatched it, willing it to convert all its neighbors to follow its example. A faint blue glow emanated from underneath her palms. The fur on her hands shot up straight as if the individual strands were answering a morning roll call. Leaning over her own hands, she let blood run freely, feeding the electrum reaction. In her mind, she wove the electricity into a net, draping it over Leo's heart. Then, she dragged it through. Detective McKinley said something, but Naira was too focused on finding just the right output to listen. Her head began to swim. Her chin sagged. The reaction was nearly spent, and so was she. Then, finally, it caught. There was little outward sign, but she felt when his heart responded. Killing the reaction, she checked his pulse again. It was steady. She didn't bother counting the beats. She was just relieved that it had even worked. Hey, maybe you should take it easy. You're losing a lot of blood. Naira felt Detective McKinley's hand on her shoulder, but she shook her head stubbornly. She fished in her bag until she found one of the Curum crystals, a clear thing, a little smaller than a finger. Biting it until she heard the crack, she stuffed it in her mouth and began sucking it like a lozenge. The strong taste of antiseptic alcohol joined the bitter iron flavor. Fresh warmth enveloped her tongue as she focused every bit of prism she had left to stop the bleeding. Readjusting so she was no longer sitting on her own tail, Naira leaned into her good hand. Blood splashed her fingers as she spit out another mouthful. McKinley took a moment to check Detective Parsons herself, then looked back up to Naira. Your eyes. The glow is fading. Naira didn't even have the energy to return a nod. Who are you, really? A wry smile took over Naira's face, and she literally choked on a laugh. Around the waning Curum crystal, she said, I'm just a teacher. Noelle gathered the dishes from table 21. She nearly forgot to make use of the plastic tub. Back at Cressburger, she'd learned to stack everything in her arms, a practice that naturally limited how much she could carry. Now, she was far more likely to accidentally overfill the tub. In fact, she lost a syrup-covered fork as it slid off the stack. It clattered to the colorfully tiled floor, but the dinner rush had already passed, so there weren't many customers around to notice. Embarrassment quickly passing, she picked up the fork, making a mental note to mop well tonight. Setting the tub of dishes down on table 18, she started wiping down table 16. The numbering system had been a little odd for her at first. Cressburger had worked from a sequential grid, but Benji's was clockwise, to account for the semicircle shape of the dining area. The pattern made sense once you were used to it. A lone snipperd in an officer's uniform sat at the next table over. He'd been sitting at table 14 for the better part of 3 hours. His friends hadn't arrived during the rush like he'd hoped they would. Instead, he waited alone. Oops. Instead, he waited alone, like a hound waiting on the porch and refusing to accept that the master won't be home tonight. He stared down into his empty glass, rolling it between his palms. Can I get you another cream soda, hon? Noelle's question pulled his attention back to the present. The regular, she'd learned his name was Tolson, looked up at her and smiled. He shook his head. I've had 4 already. Any more and even I'd get a headache. Noelle folded the cloth, wiping up where she'd sprayed down the adjacent table. Where's your partner, Leo? Oh, we're not partners. He's a detective, and I'm just a street snob. Could have fooled me, hon. Y'all seem pretty close. Tolson grinned, corners of his smile disappearing into the chub of his cheeks. We met back in police academy, got paired up early on, and I knew we were destined to be the best of friends. It's nice to have friends to study with, Noelle admitted, thinking back to her own early college experiences. You working tonight? Yeah, there was another high-profile homicide last night, so he's working that. He'll come over when he's done. Noelle glanced at the 2 extra waters Tolson had ordered. The ice had melted in both drinks well over an hour ago. So, who's number 3? Tolson seemed confused, until she pointed at the glasses on his table. Oh, that'll be Naira, unless she's too busy or something. She's the Nulf that was here about a week ago. Folding the towel again, Noelle threw it over her shoulder, then leaned against 16th's booth to face Tolson. And what's her deal? It was prying to ask, but trying to suppress her own curiosity was about like trying to milk a cow who wasn't lactating. It produced nothing of value and frustrated everyone involved. Besides, it was written plain as day on Tolson's face that he appreciated the company. Jen had gone home an hour ago, so there was no one to yell at Noelle for fraternizing with customers. Jen probably couldn't even spell the word fraternizing. She'd forget the H. Tolson's eyes lit up, and he stopped rolling his glass. Oh, she's cool. She teaches alchemy at the university, and she's been helping with our case. Examines physical evidence, puts stuff in vials of liquid, and makes it turn colors. I guess she accidentally started 3 separate fires in her lab last year, but put them out herself with magic and aquam. Aquam? Noelle asked. Like the stuff they use to make drinking water. Right? So she's been too busy to come the last few times? Tolson shrugged. She's got her own work and life to manage. Besides, she rode with Leo to get here last time, and that probably made her rethink her life decisions a bit. He winked at the last part, then checked over his shoulder to glance at the front door. He had correctly heard it open, but it was another customer leaving. His shoulders drooped. Want to use the phone? See if something came up? Or if they're still coming? He turned back to her with a smile she could see through. Leo can't resist a Benji's run any more than I can. He'll be here. He's probably just running late. Maybe he had to drop her off at the university or something. Well, that would be mighty thoughtful of him. Tolson grinned. He'd deny it tooth and claw if he heard you say that. Gets embarrassed easily, but he really is a nice guy, especially once you get some coffee in him. Again, Noelle's curiosity led her to ask a question that might get her in trouble. I don't see a lot of acts of kindness like that done for Nulfs around here. What I've seen of Cyphus hasn't been too flattering in that regard. Tolson raised an eyebrow, and she watched for when his expression would darken. Only, it didn't. Instead, he gave a wry smile and a shrug. Yeah, people around here are comfortable with the norm. Is it different where you're from? That obvious I'm not from around here? I'd be a pretty lousy officer if I couldn't figure that out. And it's not like you pinned it or anything. Noelle's gaze took a walk around the room. Nothing visible but Sneppards. Yeah, Dakota's a little different. I've had some good friends and mentors who were Nulfs. It's not a bad thing, getting to see a different perspective on life. There's a lot less hoops to jump through for everyone back in Dakota. But here in Cyphus, they've got separate pens for everybody, and they round them up rather than let everyone graze together. Tolson looked a bit confused by the metaphor, and she couldn't hold in her chuckle. Just saying, warms my heart, gives me hope for this seed, to see people like you and Leo taking care of others. She leveled a finger at him as she pushed off the booth. But don't let her get away with ordering so little next time. Poor thing's starving herself, so you need to be a better example for her. This produced a grin from the officer. Leaning back, he clapped a hand to his protruding belly. If there's anyone that can be a living example of the importance of good eating, I accept this burden and responsibility. Noel returned his grin. And that's what I like to hear. I'm gonna go take these to the back, but if you need anything, you flag me down, okay? In the meantime, I'll let Mahandra know to get a cheese melt going. He can keep it warm till Leo gets here. Tolson nodded. Thanks, Noel. For the record, you're my new favorite waitress. Scooping up her tub of dishes and bracing it against her hip, she leaned a bit closer to him. I'll believe it when you tip me like it. His stunned silence was victory for the night, his expression candy for her brain. She gave him a wink, and his shocked embarrassment improved slightly. Walking away, she heard him call out, All right, challenge accepted. Smiling to herself, she stopped at table 3 for a few more dishes. The atmosphere here was so much better than it had ever been at her old work. Friendly customers were a blessing Noelle no longer took for granted. She'd almost made it to the kitchen door with her load when the phone rang. Leaving the tub of dishes on the counter, she picked up the phone. Thank you for calling Benji's Diner. This is Noelle. How can I help you? A feminine voice responded, and Noelle didn't need to see her face to read her mood. The quiet, forced calm of her words was enough. This is Detective McKinley with Cyphus Police. I'm trying to track down Officer Gray, and I'm hoping he's still there. Big bubbly fella? Goes by Tolson? Yes, that's the one. Just a sec, hon. I'll get him on the line. Noelle did so, waving him over and leaving him with the phone behind the counter while she took the load of dishes back to Rigel. When she peeked out of the kitchen again, Officer Tolson was crying.